Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to this new episode of Swift Quiz. This time I have a very weird piece of code for you, so let's get started and let's take a look at it. As you can see, I first defined an enum that I've called empty, and that enum is indeed empty because inside it I haven't defined a single case. After that, I've also defined a generic function called magic. This function takes one argument of type empty, so remember it's my empty enum, and it returns a generic value of type t. And once again, and just like with the previous enum, the body of the function has been left on purpose entirely empty. And so the question I now want to ask you is, do you think this code will build or not? At first glance, it seems the answer is pretty obvious. That function says in its signature that it returns a value of type t, but inside the body it doesn't return anything, so it would stand to reason that this code should not build. But on the other hand, the argument I pass to the function is so weird, it's an enum with absolutely no cases, that maybe this could also have an impact on whether or not the compiler will accept that code. So let me know in the comments what your answer is. On my end, I'm going to run the playground and we're going to see what the compiler makes of this code. And as you can see, the code did successfully build. There are no errors or warning. It seems that the compiler is actually fine with this very weird piece of code. And to understand why the function magic is valid Swift code, we need to think about what a possible call site to that function would look like. If I want to call the function magic, I of course need to provide it with its argument. But remember that this argument is of type empty, and empty is a type that possesses no value. So actually, the only way I could make a call to the function magic build would be by doing something like this, by doing a force cast of some value to the type empty. But of course, this code would build, but it would always crash at runtime because since the type empty has no value, it's impossible for a force cast of a value to empty to succeed. And so actually, regardless of what we do, it is impossible to write a code that will successfully manage to call the function magic. And that's actually for that same exact reason that the implementation of the function magic is valid Swift code. Because since the enum empty is empty, the compiler is able to find out at compile time that it is actually impossible to call the function magic. And so since that function will never be called, we don't need to provide it with a body because that body will never be executed. So to say it differently, this argument of type empty represents an impossible code path. The compiler is able to understand it, and that's why it doesn't care about what is inside the implementation of the function, because the compiler knows that this implementation will never be executed since the call site of the function is an impossible code path. And this behavior is actually so useful that Swift comes with a built-in empty enum. It's not called empty, instead it's called never. If you take a look at how it is implemented, you will see that it is also an empty enum that also comes with conformance to some common protocols in Swift in order to make it even more useful to use. And for instance, you might have used never if you have written code with combine and you had to write a publisher that could never generate an error. It's very possible that you used never for the error type and maybe you hadn't noticed, but when you did so, the compiler no longer required you to write the code to deal with the possible errors, and that's because the compiler was able to prove that an error would be an impossible code path since you had used the type never for the error type. Alright, that's all I wanted to show you for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for watching and see you next time.